Welcome to Talking Points. I'm Esme Murphy. Our conversation here is about daycare safety. We know that Minnesota has some of the highest daycare costs in the nation. Infant care costs a staggering $20,000 a year. For a 4-year-old, the cost is $15,500 a year. The explanation you hear on why daycare is so expensive in Minnesota is that there's high demand, but also that standards, including caregiver-child ratios, are smaller. For example, Minnesota requires a 4-to-1 ratio in infant rooms. The goal, obviously, to try and ensure safety and that protocols are being met. But on top of these staggering costs, local families have been confronted with cases of abuse and questions about care at local daycares. One young victim is Sybil West of Blaine. Her mother captured her bruises, not knowing at first what caused them. Sybil's dad is Republican State Representative Nolan West of Blaine. And since the discovery of the abuse, Representative West has been on a mission to make daycare centers safer. Last legislative session, he introduced bills requiring warnings to be issued to parents on how to recognize abuse, to expand background checks for daycare workers, make cameras mandatory in child care center, infant and toddler rooms, and require child care centers to retain their video for 90 days initially, he hoped, and to expand access to technology grants to help centers buy cameras. Representative West ran into a lot of roadblocks in the legislature, but he is working on expanding his efforts in the 2026 legislative session, and we're very happy to have Sybil's dad, Representative Nolan West, with us. Thank you very much for coming in.
I love being introduced to Sybil's dad.
I had a feeling you would. First of all, just share your story about what happened to you and your family.
Yeah, so back, man, it feels like forever ago now, but Sybil went to Small World Learning Center in Blaine for her first daycare after she was old enough.
And how old was she?
She was 2 months when we sent her there, and then she was there through 6 months.
Okay, as an infant, all right.
Yeah, so as an infant, and we went there because they offered 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week, so I would watch Sybil on Fridays. That was the deciding factor. We couldn't get that at some other places we were looking at. She was there for a little over a month, 2 months, and then we saw some bruises on her, and my wife was super immediately mama bear. She documented those, but I feel like a moron because I told her, how could anybody do this to this tiny angel? I'm sure it's fine. We brought it up to the workers. They gave excuses, which we believed at the time, but they were a little weird.
Yeah.
One bruise on her back, she said she rolled on a magnet, for example. I was like, that doesn't really make sense, but the truth was absolutely no way we'd ever consider it. So we actually ended up leaving the daycare prior to knowing anything was going on. But when they fractured another baby's leg, because it wasn't just Sybil, we went back through what we had taken pictures of and realized they got the same excuses, the other families, that they gave us, and this had been going on for quite some time. Right. And Sybil was one of the 5 felony charges that resulted from that. Right.
There's big criminal investigation. One young woman has pled guilty. I think the other is still making its way through court. This turned out to be a very big deal. You immediately put on your Papa Bear hat and said, I'm a legislator, I'm going to do something about it. And I want to go over some of the things, as I listed them, that you tried to do. One is you wanted a requirement for warning to new parents about what abuse looks like. And first you think, well, why would they need that? But it's a really important thing. Tell us about the warning and what you realized afterwards you should have known or could have known.
Right. That was one of the biggest misses, because it's I couldn't believe it, but I didn't know what to look for either. And so what we got passed was requiring a child's first care visit with a healthcare provider, that the families get presented with information on recognizing signs of abuse. And if there's one thing that I can do after having this experience, it's I want every family to know, if your immobile infant has any bruising whatsoever, it needs to be investigated. It could be a blood condition or something, but it also could be this.
And that's the point. This child Sybil was not walking around and bumping into things or dropping things, on herself. And she did have these bruises, smaller bruises, but they were bruises nonetheless.
Yeah, and yeah, she's not hanging out with anybody who could give her bruises except for the caretakers there.
So that's something that you did get through, which is very important, because I think even new parents may not, it's obvious, but you don't think about that. Expanding background checks on the workers. Here, you ran into federal laws and local laws. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so this was less about actual legislators who didn't want to vote for it. It was about just the logistics of making this happen. So the bill required the continual checking of the NCMEC system, which is the exploited children database that keeps track of, online child pornography, among other things. And if a daycare worker pops in that system, we wanted to create something that would then trigger it so that we could make sure somebody who shouldn't be around children is not around children. There are some data sharing issues with federal law in relation to that database, but we're working with Congressman Zimmer's office to change that so we can move that forward next time.
All right. Things obviously a lot more complicated than you thought. Now, this was the one where you really had some trouble, and you're still working on this, I know, is making cameras mandatory in infant and toddler rooms. I mean, the reasons seem pretty obvious. You ran into problems. Tell us about them.
Yeah, that one, there were problems with working through the legislature just because people didn't want us.
Yeah, and your center actually had cameras, and we'll get into that other part too. But what happened? Was it just the cost that was the big objection?
So nobody wants to add costs to child care, so was cognitive of that. However, like that center, many centers already have cameras. So, and I do a lot of video work outside the legislature. I know how much these things cost. I knew exactly what kind of burden I was putting on the child care centers.
And the cost is coming down. I mean, it's still expensive, but the cost for good cameras is coming down.
Oh, it's ridiculous, and you don't even need that good a camera. I mean, it's amazing how affordable these things are. So, doing the research, the cost of the system was at most, like on the high end for what was required, just 2 rooms, $5,000 of upfront costs, like install and the hardware and those types of things, and then a monthly cost for the data storage of around $60 a year, $60 a month at the most.
You didn't get that. That's what you pushed for. You
got a version.
You got a fragment of it, which is a requirement that if a daycare has a violation, a safety violation, then they have to have it.
If they have specifically a maltreatment violation. I mean, like the sad thing, the first thing you think, well, if there's already a maltreatment violation, you missed the boat. But it was one of the arguments put forth was this doesn't even focus on like the bad center, like the centers who need focusing. So in the last few days of session, when I started really panicking, if you can see my depression if you watch these hearings, I threw a last compromise of the bare minimum that I thought would move the needle, which was maltreatment centers with those violations. Only infant and toddler rooms, I dropped the requirement for outdoor cameras. And then I had to drop parent access, which I am sad. I think parents should have some access.
In other words, be able to see the cameras.
Like to some degree. They shouldn't just have willy-nilly access because parents can be crazy.
That's true. That's true. And you've got other kids involved.
Right. And I don't want daycare workers to be unnecessarily harassed.
Right.
But what I wanted was if a doctor provides a note or documentation that the parent should be concerned about something they brought them in for, then they'd have access, which I didn't even get that, which was really frustrating. And then the 90-day requirement ended up being 28 days. So
okay, and so you wanted them to keep the video for 90 days. You got 28 days for those that have maltreatment. I also want to mention that one of the maltreatment violations can be something like walking away for too long. I mean, there's stuff that you wouldn't, obviously that's not something that should be done with an infant when you've got other infants in a daycare setting, but it's not something that rises to the mind of harming physically.
Like
abuse, so you did get that. Are you going to continue to push for some of these measures and try and kind of tie up some loose ends here? So
it goes into effect July 1st, 2026. So there's an argument of let's see how it works. However, a lot of the resistance I got, which this had to go to the tribunal, this was a leadership decision, the last part of our budget that we couldn't agree to, which I am very grateful to former Speaker Hortman for helping make this happen. And we have this, there was the last ditch effort, lost my train of thought.
No, you're talking about Speaker Hortman
Yeah.
making this possible. One of the last-ditch things that you got is that you actually got more money put into an account to help daycares get these cameras in. Tell us about that, because that money is still available, you told me.
Yeah, no, that money is available. So they're called technology grants. So if a center wants to install some cameras, we have put in, I think it was $138,000 into this account that they can apply for to receive money for that.
You know, in the news, that since your incident happened, there have been other cases where there have been investigations and allegations. What does that, when you hear that, what do you think?
Well, I can't imagine being a family that doesn't get to see their child again. That just sounds insane. I can't imagine. And we'll figure out what exactly happened there. But it just shows there's more work to be done. And if there are cameras and parents have some degree of access, it's like they could know what's going on. Imagine being a family who you got the warning, your kid appears fine, but you still want to know what happened.
Absolutely.
And that's where I think we need to do this. We need to broaden it, and I'm hoping we can have some of those discussions.
Okay. All right. Well, Representative Nolan West, thank you so much for coming by. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And that does it for this edition of Talking Points. As always, please email me with comments and suggestions at esme@cbs.com. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Esme Murphy, WCCO News.